I'm Dr. Sarah Davis, and I am one of the professors at the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Service at Ohio University. In this video, I'd like to just give you a short overview about co-production systems. Co-production systems can be interpreted in a number of different ways, but they can be very valuable for improving the resilience of systems, in the efficiency of systems, and for improving collaborative relationships in management. So I'd like to start by just talking about what the definition of co-production is. If you have a background in engineering or agriculture or maybe even business, then we would typically think of co-production in terms of this first definition: the synergistic production of multiple resources in a way that improves both the efficiency and value. So one example that a lot of people are familiar with is the co-production of co-products. For example, from a production system like bioethanol that comes from corn, there is a co-product, dry distilled grains. The primary product from that system is bioethanol, but there's a secondary product that's produced from the leftover material that's called dry distiller grains, and that's used as livestock feed. And it adds additional value to the production system because it's an additional product that can be sold. It also adds value in terms of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions of the overall production system and improving the carbon balance of the system. If you have a background in social sciences, however, you might be familiar with a different definition for co-production, and that is the second one that's listed here: the collaborative design of systems that depend on relationships. And this is also an important element when thinking about co-production systems, because it requires co-management of two different systems, requires significant collaboration. It requires planning and strategic design that really it is essential to include different entities, interdisciplinary entities, and to have collaboration among organizations. Co-production can be very helpful for addressing some of our current grand challenges, which include things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions, maintaining biodiverse ecosystems, and reducing habitat loss that support valuable species. But we're also looking at challenges to increase energy production from renewable sources. And we also need to be thinking about how to harmonize environmental and economic objectives. Historically, the environmental objectives have been treated as separate priorities under a separate management structure than economic objectives. But as we move into the future, it becomes more and more essential for us to harmonize environmental objectives with economic objectives. We need to be able to address our economic concerns, but while also gaining environmental benefits from these systems. That requires interdisciplinary thinking, it requires systems thinking, and it requires thinking about co-production systems. Here's an example of a very small-scale co-production system. This is an aerial view of a facility that's part of Ohio University's campus. We're looking down with an overhead view, and the buildings that you see here represent the composting facility for campus. This is where food waste from dining halls is aggregated and processed in what is the largest in-vessel composting facility at any university in the United States. And so this is dealing with the one challenge of managing wastes, and the composting process allows us to generate a valuable product from a waste stream. So if we were to manage a waste system in isolation, it would be a cost to deal with that waste. But by running this waste through a composting facility, we have the generation of a soil amendment. You can see the windrows laid out here where we have, and these windrows are really maturing compost, and that can be used as a soil amendment. This also represents a co-production system because there is renewable energy generation. This composting facility relies largely on renewable energy from solar, and there are solar panels installed on the roof as well as adjacent to the buildings. And then right here is a small greenhouse that houses an anaerobic digester. This is used for research and education purposes, but it's looking at the potential for diverting some of the waste into anaerobic digestion to generate both fuel and fertilizer. So there are multiple systems that are converging here at this site, and it represents co-production. A lot of different people were involved in making this happen, a lot of different funding entities, and the design has evolved over time. Co-production has the potential to promote both efficiency through something like waste reduction and resiliency through diversification. And so here, this conceptual model gives you an idea of how we might have a circular economy where we're capturing wastes and making them into valuable products. That's the circular part of this. But the co-production part is represented by where the arrows diverge. And we have two different potential pathways here. And this is reducing waste and improving efficiency because we have wastes from these systems that are turned into a valuable product, fuel and fertilizer. But the resilience comes from these two different production systems where if there is disruption to one, the other can still maintain the circular economy. So if there's disruption to the bioenergy agricultural system for some reason, the fertilizer can still be used in the food production system. And it's still providing a source of waste to keep the anaerobic digestion running to generate fuel. So this is just a simple example of how co-production systems can impart benefits. Another way we can think about co-production systems is in the way we use land. So here's a map that just shows the areas in the central Appalachian region that have been mined for coal. And the locations that have had surface mining that has been abandoned, so this was mining in the past and these are now abandoned mine sites, are represented in the blue color here. Some of these places may have been successfully reclaimed and we have some small locations where there are forests that are returning. In other cases, there have been challenges to reclamation of these sites. Here's a close-up view. This is again close to the location of Ohio University's campus. We have a lot of green areas and forests in this region, but we also still have mining activity active, and you can see some of the places where there's no forest and there's really very little soil in some of these places as well. And this is ongoing mining activity. So mining is one type of land use. It has significant environmental impacts associated with it. Co-production might offer us an opportunity to think about how we can reclaim the land while also managing it for valuable products. In 2018, there were over 300,000 acres of abandoned mine land that had not been successfully reclaimed and turned to native forest habitat, and fall into a number of different categories, including a category that is labeled as barren, which has very little biological life supported on it. There's the potential to grow certain kinds of crops on these lands. There are very few that would survive, but some of the species we've been studying as advanced biofuel crops could potentially grow on abandoned mine sites. And this table just summarizes a comparison of the yield that can be produced on abandoned mine land relative to prime agricultural land and relative to abandoned agricultural land. So even though the yields are lower, it's still higher than what we would typically see in something like a corn production system. And corn bioethanol, by the way, is the largest source of biofuel globally right now. And a huge portion of the land area in the United States is devoted to supporting that market. This kind of perennial grass presents an alternative where it can grow on very degraded lands like abandoned mine sites and can potentially produce more bioethanol per unit land area than the corn bioethanol that we currently are producing. So that's another example of co-production. In this case, we're thinking about land use, co-production, the potential for serving two purposes of managing land for reclamation while also producing a valuable product. And so there are many different complex issues associated with land use and many opportunities for thinking about how to co-produce on abandoned lands. So I would challenge you to think about what other co-production opportunities exist for sustainable resource production. And in some cases, we could look at resource production that is combined with recreational opportunities. We could look at supporting native habitat regeneration and biodiversity while we also generate income through recreation. And that would provide another example of co-production. In Ohio right now, there are some emerging issues around co-production of solar energy and agricultural systems. So there are many different examples to which this idea of co-production systems can be applied. One of the challenges in co-production systems is to make sure that there is a strategic design that with the goal of producing the most possible benefits. We want to make sure that co-production systems don't enhance the environmental degradation, for example. We want to make sure that co-production systems support both the health and welfare of the societies that live in locations where they're implemented. And so there are a number of different things to consider. And so here we can see how a supply chain, for example, an agricultural supply chain, might interact with environmental impacts, with political change, and with economic impacts. And if we think about this in terms of the gear systems that are shown here conceptually, we don't want to have competing priorities that end up having a gridlock among these gears, that all of these systems have to be moving in the right direction towards the goals that are most beneficial for both environment and human health. In order to accomplish this, it's essential to get interdisciplinary perspective and to engage the people that will be most affected by co-production systems. So stakeholder engagement is extremely important. And it's also important to consult people who have the knowledge and information to inform the development of the best designs. So it's a balance of these two, negotiating and listening to stakeholders, taking the time to listen to the many different perspectives, and also including an evidence-based design by leaning on those who are experts in the systems that will be co-managed. So I hope some of this information about co-production systems is useful to you, and thank you for taking the time to listen.